Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here with a port report for Dying Light. As much as I'd love to bring you a WTF is, the review copies of this game were given out 12 hours before the launch, which is by no means enough time to actually get a decent impression, especially since I had a lot of other things to do. So it is coming, it's just not going to be here as of yet. But what I can do is I can talk in detail about the port. I've been working quite a lot on technical issues with this game. And I've run into some interesting things that I'd like to share, which should be pertinent to your purchase decision. In the meantime, though, we'll start with the options menu, and we'll see exactly what the functionality is, and then we'll talk about performance, and which will obviously include a bit of gameplay. Okay, let us begin with the most important thing, of course, field of view slider. Yes, I know. You can all rejoice over the epic May. I believe the kids call it dank these days. But what's most important is that this game actually has it, and Techland generally don't put these into their games, which has caused a number of problems in the past. So the fact that it has one is good. Now, it is based on vertical field of view. Now, what's going to happen is you mess around with this. Now, if you go in game with this, it's going to show both the vertical and horizontal FOV around here. This is about 90. So you can go up to about 100, give or take, which is an acceptable number. So I've had no simulation sickness problems with this game at all. And that's important because this is a game about parkour and running in first person. So that is prime real estate for motion sickness issues. So it's good that that's not there. You can actually, in order to ease motion sickness, turn the dot crosshair on or off. It's an interesting idea. I never thought of the notion that a consistent, stable part of the UI could actually ease motion sickness. I don't know if it actually does, but it's cool that they put that in there nonetheless. Also got an option to hold F to swap the equipped weapon, which is a neat little idea if you'd like to do that rather than use the mouse wheel. Subtitles on or off, hints on or off, and separate audio sliders for everything. Yep, everything is above board here, from what I can tell. So let's move on to controls. So, default mouse smoothing is at 0. This is good. I've not noticed any obvious smoothing, acceleration, or other shenanigans involving the mouse control. It also has a separate sensitivity slider for menus, which is really quite nice. Most games don't include that. Inversion on or off, if you so desire, and you can also change your controller type 360 by default, which has all of these options, including auto aim. Weak. And, of course, keyboard and mouse. Now, let's do a little bit of rebinding here. Rebinding's pretty good. You don't have a secondary option for things, but you can rebind pretty much everything in the game, and you can even use things like B5 on the mouse, the 5th mouse button. So it does support mice with more than 3 buttons. It also allows you to rebind to wheel up and wheel down if you so desire. This is good. This appears to be a fully functional set of key bindings. I've not found a button yet. There might be one. I'm sorry, I didn't test all 100 plus buttons on the keyboard that does not rebind. It seems everything works nicely. So the rebinding functionality is there. It's nicely divided into logical menus. And of course, it also has this. All these quick selects, which you can set, which I'm actually going to bind right now. I'm going to default here, just to get rid of the stuff that I messed up. And let's do some rebinding. Isn't it lovely? Yes, it is. Look at this. Select weapon 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we can then set equipment 2, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Cool. We got buttons. We're able to use them. Such is the nature of things. We don't need previous equipment and next equipment now. Although, equipment menu might be nice. I think I could just be done under I anyway. What's equipment menu under? Let's give it... can we give it a key combination? We can't, unfortunately. So, that is one thing it doesn't let you do. It doesn't let you select multiple keys simultaneously. I did try. That does not work. Most games don't really let you do that. So, I'm not hugely bothered by the fact that it does not. Let's bind player menu to P. That might do the trick. And we then need to maybe, just maybe, let's just default everything back to where it was. There we go. Cool. All right, let's move on to video options. So, what do we got here? It goes all the way up to 4K, if you happen to have the support for it. I have SLI on right now, which means that my DSR is disabled, so it's not showing the 4K resolution. But on one card, you can go all the way up to 4K. Of course, if you happen to have a 4K monitor, you can also go up to 4K, although I would be surprised if you're able to run it at a stable frame rate without messing with it a lot. VSync on or off, full screen on or off, no borderless window, I'm afraid, so just bear that in mind. And then you've got texture quality, shadow map size, foliage quality, view distance. This is going to be very important later, so keep an eye on this one. Ambient Occlusion, and then a couple of Nvidia specific effects with GameWorks, as you can see here. HBAO plus and depth of field, and then you've got motion blur, which I turn off due to personal preference, although some of you might want it on. since it's a game about running, so motion blur can actually enhance the experience in some people's eyes. I personally don't like it for videos on YouTube because it tends to make it look very artifacty and difficult to see fine detail, which is not good because YouTube is pretty bad at that to begin with. And then you've got anti-aliasing. Now, as to what kind of AA this is, I could not say. If I was to hazard a guess based on the film grain, it's probably TXAA. That's my thought on the matter. It may very well be the brand new MFAA, but it's hard to say one way or the other, so I think it's TXAA. Alright, cool. So outside of that, the only other thing to look at is the fact that you can turn voice chat on or off in the multiplayer mode. Very important. A lot of games don't let you do that. That's a sign of a bad port. Okay, we're going to jump in, and we're going to do a few things. We're going to do some comparisons between 1 card and 2 cards. This is kind of important because they claim to have today released a functional SLI profile, but it doesn't really seem to be doing much. And then we're going to focus on things that affect the frame rate, specifically view distance, which is the absolute biggest hog, and we'll try and compare the difference, and then you can see whether or not you think the view distance is really worth the massive compromise in frame rate that appears to occur. Alright, let's get into it. Okay, so welcome to Dying Light. Now, for the purposes of this recording, we will be using Nvidia Shadowplay, because it has essentially zero overhead effectively on frame rate, whereas other capture programs tend to knock frame rate down, which means that doing an analysis of frame rate becomes impossible. So that means that there may be some quality issues, let's just say. I mean, it's not really a big deal, most people don't notice it, but Shadowplay captures a lossy kind of format and at a lower bit rate than other capture programs, so it does mean that the game looks slightly worse than it should. But it's YouTube, most people don't notice. Okay, so, first things first, let's talk about frame rate and why it just plummeted down to 50. So, the big culprit, the giant culprit for all of this is one setting. And that setting is this one, view distance. This is the one that kills everything. I initially thought it was texture quality. It's not. It's view distance. Everything else has almost no effect on frame rate. Let's demonstrate that. Can't mess with texture quality for some reason outside of it, but I can knock everything else down to low or off. Now, bear in mind, you were getting about 53 frames per second through that window. Let's turn every setting off, everything else down to low, and see what happens. Not a damn thing. You maybe gain 1 frame at most looking out of that window there. So that's not too good, is it? So what do you do to improve your frame rate? Bear in mind this is running on SLI, but notice the GPU usage is very low. It's either not properly optimized in terms of its SLI profile, or something else is bottlenecking it. It might be a multi-threading issue. You're seeing CPU 1 is almost constantly at 100%. It's maybe not balancing the load properly again across all of the cores. So that might be something they can fix. I certainly hope it's something they can fix. Alright, Ambient Occlusion on, HBAO on, there we go. Shadow mapping, okay. This is back. Now, see what happens when I turn it down to minimum. Oh, look! The frame rate almost doubled to almost no appreciable difference through this window. Let's go and have a look and see what we can see. Now, this is currently running at a more than acceptable frame rate, but let's go outside, because of course that's where the demanding stuff's going to happen. Note the GPU usage here, out into the wonderful, wonderful, well, brown world. And it's at about 85 frames per second. It's kind of fine. It does go kind of all over the place, though. I've noticed a lot of frame rate variance in this game. Now, my G-Sync monitor does deal with that quite nicely. If you don't have G-Sync, you're probably at post 60 FPS gonna want to V-Sync in order to try and avoid tearing. But you will notice there is a gigantic difference. In this direction, we're about 60 frames. In this direction, we're about 100. Now, what about that view distance? Well, let's try and get up somewhere high and see how much it actually matters. Because this is, I think, the key little variable that you're gonna have to mess with in a big way in order to get to an acceptable frame rate. So we're going to get a little bit higher, which means we can see just a little bit more. That should do the job quite nicely. Alright, so just ignore the talking for the time being. So, what do we got? Big city, lots of detail. Alright, what happens if I change this setting over? We're going to change view distance all the way up to maximum. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a comparison on the screen between the detail levels. Now up here, we can actually manage post 60. We can keep it up there. But if I turn around, oops, where did my frame rate go? That is ridiculous, isn't it? But what about the level of detail? I mean, is there a difference? Is there any appreciable difference between the two? Well, not really. Essentially, what view distance is doing here is it's affecting LOD, level of detail, which means the level of detail at distance, obviously, as you might imagine. But what it doesn't appear to be doing is causing pop-in, which is the big gameplay-focused difference between the two. Pop-in means that things can appear, including enemies, out of thin air at close range, which can be a real problem. And not only does it take you right out of the experience, but it also often involves your face being bitten off. And yet, you're not noticing a really big difference in detail here, are you? It's mostly on the trees, if you notice here. Let's just do a direct comparison. And you'll notice it's mostly things like the trees, a little bit of extra detail on that radio tower in the distance. Nothing too crazy. But the frame rate, just gutted. Absolutely gutted. So, where's the kind of happy medium? What about if we go halfway here? Well, that gets me up to about 55. This is perhaps the most intense area to look at. A lot of detail, there's a lot of really big lighting going on. It looks kind of pretty, you've got to admit. So, we're not quite at 60. Let's mess a little bit more. Let's, what about here? Will that do the trick? There we go. Okay, cool. The only other variable that does affect frame rate a little bit is field of view, which is predictable. You know, if you're seeing more stuff on the screen at any given time, this is currently at 90, which is my preferred setting, then you might have a few problems. Let's crank it to 104. Nope, I actually don't want to do that whatsoever. Let's go back. Frame rate impact. It's showing a bit more on the screen, so it's going to lose a few frames here and there. Not a giant difference, but just bear that in mind if you want to crank all the way up when it comes to field of view. That's 104, by the way. So you'll see the modifier down there. Again, 90 is... That's what I shoot for in all games. 90 is like the default position where I'm absolutely fine. I can deal with 80, but anything lower than that, I tend to experience simulation sickness. So, there we go. And back up goes the frame rate. All right, so this is kind of okay, right? This should do the job. And indeed, if you happen to be down in the street when you're not looking at that stuff, you'll notice the frame rate suddenly increases quite dramatically. So we have ourselves some zombies here. Let's hit them with my French wrench. Stylish. Je suis wrench. I am wrench. Indeed. So we have a little bit of a dash here. So here's the important part. This is the really vital issue when it comes... I'm just going to try and slide under there. There we go. This is the vital issue when it comes to view distance. Exactly how many zombies are going to pop in out of nowhere if we set our view distance to very, very low. That is the key. And that is the wrong menu. Let's try this one. Alright, minimum view distance. Keep an eye out for pop-in. What you're seeing mostly is LOD artifacts. If you keep an eye on things like cars in the distance, you're going to notice that they kind of slightly morph in. Yeah? It looks like there's... Oh, hello. Yeah, you go away. Thank you very much. And trees as well. And I should probably craft a medikit before I die, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to demonstrate a great deal, am I? So we're just going to make this. There we go. That should do the trick. And sorted. Excellent. But are you noticing zombies pop in? In fact, the view distance on the zombies is actually quite high, surprisingly enough. But you see little things, like the sign on the drugstore over there will kind of pop in at minimum view distance here. It's gone here, and it appears here. But frankly, even at minimum view distance, things are pretty good, honestly. Like, they're a hell of a lot better than Ubisoft games. I'll give them credit for that. So, not too much to complain about there. And you're not really getting relevant zombie pop-in. You're not having zombies appear directly in front of you. That is a huge deal. Massive deal. So, as far as I'm concerned, turning down the view distance is absolutely worthwhile. Really is. And I would strongly suggest that you do it. Now, the other concern, of course, is SLI. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the house, and we're going to do a little bit of a test. And we're going to demonstrate the difference between the level of detail on SLI and the frame rate versus no SLI, and try to conclude whether or not there is an appreciable difference. And usually you want SLI on in almost all circumstances, if it's all possible. I mean, why wouldn't you? You take advantage of the extra frame rate where you can. But we're going to do 2 tests. I'm going to go back to the safe house in order to do them. The first test is going to be looking out of the window, the way that we did before. And the second test is going to be running out through this dark corridor into the sunlight. And we're going to see if there's a difference. And in order to actually really appreciate the difference, we're going to crank things up, and we're going to go back to maximum view distance, because that should hopefully max out the GPU as much as possible, though it doesn't actually seem to, which is kind of scary. And it should also give us a good indication of the kind of frame rate benefit you can expect currently in the release version. Alright, so first things first, we're going to take a look out of this window here. So, with maximum view distance on, we are looking at 46 frames per second, facing directly onto this window, looking out into the open, with about 50% GPU usage, which indicates there is some issue there. I still think it might be a CPU-related bottleneck. Look at that CPU one there, 100%. Ugh. Yeah, that doesn't seem right. Now let's reduce the view distance to minimal. There we go. And we go up to about 87 frames per second. There we go. So just bear that in mind. Okay, now we're going to do the run outside. So just keep an eye on the frame rate here. And align ourselves nice and straight with the run. Crosshairs right at the top of that pillar. And forward we go. Right out into the open. About 87 frames per second, 88 frames per second. Now, of course, if we do the same thing again with view distance at maximum. So I'm going to go right back inside. Have a little dash forward. There we go. So this is about the same run here. Right on top of this. About 47 frames per second. Huge difference. Absolutely massive. Alright, now we're going to turn one of the cards off and we're going to repeat the same process. Alright, so here we are back at our window. About 46 frames per second at maximum view distance. And then if we pop that down to minimum, then you will see the frame rate goes up to about 84. That's not a big difference, is it? No, it's not, and that is concerning indeed. So, let's go do the run outside, as we mentioned earlier. Again, pretty much the biggest, most visually taxing scene in the game that I've found so far, so this is a pretty good thing to test it on. Target right here. And can't get it right. There we go. And run outside. About 73, 74. You're seeing GPU being maxed out, whereas previously with 2 GPUs, neither were being maxed out, which indicates a bottleneck somewhere else. CPU usage is down here, which is a little strange. Not really sure what's going on with that. Let's try the run again, this time with view distance up to maximum. This is perhaps where things are going to get a little bit crazy in terms of frame rate. There we go. Turn around, and here we go. Right up to here. About 43, 46, 48. That's not a big difference, is it? No. So, something is up. There's a bottleneck somewhere, or there's a SLI profile issue. That's the kind of conclusion. It's a bit of rough and ready testing methodology. I'm sure you could do a better job of it given enough time, but ultimately, the message is quite clear. The game does not benefit too much from SLI right now, and that is a problem. Alright, let's talk about the rest of the stuff before I wrap this up. We did spend a lot of time talking about performance, but obviously that's a very important thing indeed. There are quite a few people having performance problems with this on various configurations. As long as view distance is turned down, the game runs absolutely fine for me, although I do notice a large frame rate variance all the time. Again, not a problem for me because I run G-Sync, but it is perhaps a concern for others. Outside of that, the game is going to stay above 60, even on one card. Not that I'm going to gain much frame rate benefit from using both cards. That's something that Nvidia direly needs to sort out. I'm not sure what the hell they've done with it. Either that or it's an issue with Techland. I don't know whose fault it is. All I know is I'm looking for someone to blame, and I'm going to say to you, sort this damn thing out. We don't buy 2+ cards to have this happen. That's just silly, and that's going to affect a lot of people that went with the 970 configuration in SLI, because it's actually very good value. at least for a kind of performance user. So just bear that in mind. Alright, outside of that, any other PC-specific concerns? Do you have quick save? No, you don't. That's something that someone brought up in the live stream that I did. There is no quick save, so if that's something you're looking for, then you're not going to have it. However, combat feels pretty damn good. As I said, no mouse acceleration. Keyboard controls work great. It feels very much like Mirror's Edge. It may be slightly less elegant, but not too much. It does everything exactly as I would expect in terms of first-person parkour. There is, in my eyes, no benefit whatsoever to playing this on a controller over a keyboard and mouse. Keyboard and mouse is absolutely ideal for this game. It works in every way you could imagine, and it gives you much easier access to your various tools, which is going to be pretty important because you're going to be holding quite a lot of weapons, you're going to be holding quite a lot of equipment, and that's a spike trap, and I fully intend to kick this zombie into it, if it's all possible. Da-da-da! Because it's fun. Get in there. It'll move eventually. Alright, she's getting up. Yes! Face first into it. Lovely. Okay. Yeah, so I don't have any problems whatsoever with the gameplay from a PC port standpoint, which is good. Outside of these performance problems that are gonna be your mileage may vary situation and will hopefully improve over time, this seems to be a pretty damn good port. But the gigantic caveat, the huge caveat, are those performance problems and the thing with the view distance. But I honestly believe, as you might imagine, that turning view distance down to minimum is not going to impact either your visual experience or your gameplay experience. It is ultimately a superfluous option that has a massive frame rate impact, so as a result, feel free to reduce it. I know that's anathema to a lot of people. To me, it is as well. You know, I like to have my view distance at maximum in games, but it doesn't matter. Like, it really doesn't seem to matter, at least in the early game anyway. I'm seeing zombies at more than enough distance. I'm having no problems whatsoever dealing with them. Maybe it's a problem at night, but I find that unlikely. It's probably even less of a problem at night, because you're naturally going to not see as far anyway. So unless you are really bothered by slight level of detail artifacts, like things like tree leaves morphing in, which is frankly very common in modern games right now. You know, I mentioned it in Dragon Age, I mentioned it in Far Cry, and of course I mentioned Assassin's Creed Unity because it was terrible there. Outside of that, though, it's still a damn good looking game. The lighting is just, I mean, it's blinding on purpose. The visual aesthetic, while brown, is brown for a good reason. You're in the bloody Middle East at this point, I believe, anyway. It's gonna be pretty brown. It's a sun-baked area. It's a sun-baked slum city. That's exactly what you would expect to find. But outside of that, things run pretty well. Although you are noticing that on one card, we just dipped below 60 frames per second in this particular area, in a very, very well-lit kind of area. Now, I did mention earlier that turning these options down doesn't really have much of an effect, but it's always going to be on a scene-by-scene basis. Look at the complexity of this scene right here. Think about what might be impacting the frame rate. So let's change a few things around and see if we can discover what the culprit is. We've got a big tree here, we've got a lot of lighting, and we've got a lot of shadows. So we're looking at things like foliage, shadow quality, and of course whether or not HBO Plus actually has any significant impact on the frame rate. So if we mess around a little bit here, we will discover the answer. Let's do a little bit of detective work. Is it one specific option in this particular scene? One option at a time. It's shadows. Well, actually, it's not completely shadows, but this particular area is very intense based on the trees and the way that the lighting works and the shadows are cast. So that's where a lot of the frame rate drop is coming from. That's not going to really affect your performance experience too much because you're not going to, I imagine, get into many areas like that. If we increase foliage quality, that explains where the rest of the frame rate went. Lots of trees, lots of lighting, lots of shadow, logical. But in most areas, as I demonstrated earlier, there's actually very little performance difference when turning all of those options down to minimum or back up. It really does depend on the environment. So, as I said, for the most part, it's pretty good. I personally would still hold off on it for the time being. Just on the basis that I think Nvidia needs to get its act together in terms of its driver and its SLI profile. And this game needs a patch. It's not awful, totally, it's playable, absolutely, no doubt. Just for comedy's sake, we're going to turn motion blur on here. It is not awful. I think it's going to be perfectly playable for a lot of people, you know, especially those who are not too concerned about constantly having 60 or higher. It's going to be playable for them anyway. but I think that some work needs to be done, and as a direct result from a technical standpoint, I would give some caution about buying it right now. I think that you should hold off a little bit, see what they can do this week about ironing out some of these tech problems, and then it will be a much easier to recommend purchase. At least from a technical standpoint. I'm not going to give my assessment of the gameplay until I've played a great deal more of it, and I certainly will. Those who do wish to find out more information, there was a live stream, and I've put a link to it in the description below this video. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.